Hi, and welcome to the 63rd episode of the Language Meanderings podcast. My name is Jonathan, and today on the show I have a wonderful guest. His name is Richard Simcott, a man who probably doesn't need any introduction, but he is behind the website Speaking Fluently. He and Alex Rawlings have put together the Polyglot Gathering, the Polyglot Conference, and if you haven't heard of Richard, he has been widely known as speaking upwards of 20, 30 languages, and there was a very famous YouTube video a couple years back where he was practicing several languages on YouTube videos. So thank you very much for coming on to the show, Richard. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's always nice to talk about languages and to explore what we're doing so that we get the word out there to more and more people.
Mm-hmm. So you just got back from the Polyglot Gathering that was organized at the beginning of May. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how that got started?
Okay, so the Polyglot Gathering, the head organizers, what people may know, Judith Meyer, who is the person who had the idea for the gathering. And she got the idea when she came to the Polyglot Conference, which I organized in Budapest a few years ago. She came and she said, I'd love to do something like this in Berlin. And at the time, we were planning to go to another continent for the Polyglot Conference. And she said, I think we'd like to have another one in Europe, and I'd like to do one in the style of the Esperanto events that she was used to going to. And she wanted to do it over more days and to have a sort of less conference feel to the event. Esperanto events are very much, you have a lot more things going on around the sides, around the actual event itself. It's a lot less formal of an environment in terms of when people are speaking and presenting than the conference. And I think that it's a great combination with the conference. So I really support the work that Judith, Chuck and the rest of the team put into organizing the Polyglot Gathering, and so I fully support it as the person who started the Polyglot conferences. So I think I really enjoy going to them myself, and this time in Berlin was no exception. It was a lot of fun, lots of great people, old faces, friends, and new friends that we've made as well, which has been really, really good, and it's encouraging to see people going to these different events and learning more and speaking more about languages.
Cool. And what were some of your discoveries or big takeaways this year?
This year for me, there are a couple of things that I really enjoyed. I unfortunately never get a chance to go to all of the talks that I want to go to. I tend to spend so much time speaking to people and catching up. But I did go to some that I really wanted to see. I went to a talk on the Manx language, which is led by Simon Ager, and I really like the Manx language. It's a language that captivated my interest at a young age, just because it's in the region of the British Isles where I'm from. It was always shown on the weather map when I was younger, when they were showing the weather of the region. And I went as a child. It's a place that we used to go as a child with school. So I was always fascinated by it and how it's grown in recent years in popularity, and especially on the island of the Isle of Man, as well as a language. They've since I was a child, they've actually developed more programs. Groups have grown about sort of to really revive the language, and they've even got a Manx medium school. So it's great to hear about what's going on. And Simon's speciality was that he wrote his master's thesis, I believe, on the language. So it was really, really interesting to go to that. There were other really, really good talks on various things, from Chinese and the character development, which a friend of mine, Vladimir Scodetti, talked about. And also I went to a very interesting one about the philosophy of polyglottery, of polyglots, which is by Alan Jovin, and that was really entertaining. And then Alex himself did a good talk, and it was interesting. He gave one piece of advice that somebody came up to me afterwards and said, it was really funny. He said in one of his talks, sort of a quote was, "If you've been learning the language for 10 years and you feel you're not getting anywhere with it, you've got to question yourself, should I really carry on with this?" And it's something that we don't often say, and it's something that it's kind of taboo, I suppose, in not just the language community, but many communities. And it's a thing that I always say to people when they learn a language. Make sure you've got a good motivation, good reasons to learn it, so that you retain that motivation throughout the learning process. And if you don't have the reason or the need to be learning something, do question. It is valid. Should I be concentrating on something that I can really devote time to, that I need, or do I need to just adjust the level? Am I aiming for a C1 in a language, a very high level in a language that I don't really need, and have I already reached the level that I do need? So putting that question to people and actually saying, is it time to just leave it, is actually legitimate, I think. So yeah, I think they were the kind of things that I really remember well. There was also a fun thing by Michael Lovey Harris, who talked about language and imitating accents and the way we speak in languages and getting it right, and using his acting experience and showing how that works with languages. And he recited a poem in Yiddish in 3 different styles, and that was actually really quite memorable too. So yeah, there were quite a lot of things going on. And then the other languages that I'm interested in, like the Romany languages, where Daniel Crasso was talking about that, occurred with me because I live in a country where the only country, in fact, in the world where the Romany language actually has an official status in a part of the country, the Republic of Macedonia. So yeah, that was really quite interesting as well.
Cool. I think as I get a feel for, like, with the learning, do you feel you are, with some of the languages that you're learning now, kind of moving towards what would be considered endangered languages, to kind of promote their status, so that it isn't just they fall to the wayside?
Yeah, actually, I talked about this a little bit in my talk as well, and I think that for me, it's interesting to look at these languages, and I definitely want to support in whatever way I can. If my support is simply by mentioning them and giving people advice and promoting them, so that other people can dedicate time to it, who have maybe that capacity or that ability or that desire and motivation that I was talking about before, then if they're the ones that can go forward and learn it to this fluency and teach it to others, then I think that I'm very, very happy to be a vehicle for that. I myself have looked at languages like Ladino in the past, which, the numbers have been dwindling, and I've definitely done my bit to try and support that by having talks on the language, and it's something that I would like to promote again moving forward. But there are other languages as well that I think it's well worth, and it's a topic that we always have at the Polyglot conferences. In New York, we talked about the Lakota language. We had a film that we showed, and how people can get involved. So I hope that people take those nuggets of advice and links to be able to move forward and really get involved in those very worthwhile endeavors to support languages that are in decline or endangered.
Mm-hmm. And I see that when you talk about the kind of perhaps the taboo of leaving a language or questioning your motivation or connection with it, I think I've seen this a little bit where, like, when I first started with Russian, it was like 15 years ago, and I didn't go very far with it, but I just left it kind of dormant, and then I went on to other things, and all of a sudden, when I started to learn some Polish and Czech for a trip around Central Europe, all of a sudden this dormant Russian just became alive. And then more recently, in the past like 3 or 4 years, I've been actually studying Russian, and now my motivation has been increased, and I'm making connections with Russian speakers on the VK network and the language heroes community over there. And so leaving a language to the side and then coming back to it later, I don't see that necessarily being taboo. Maybe the idea of like just completely giving up on it. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I think what it is it's maybe not giving up completely, because you never know what the future holds. And like you say, you came back to Russian. And what I do notice is many people do feel guilty about stopping active study, whether it's permanently or whether they see it as permanently at the time or for a period of time. I think there's a kind of a guilt, and we sort of say, we feel almost like the books on our shelves are screaming at us, you didn't finish me. You didn't do this. This is something you didn't do. And I think it's not a problem to stop if we notice that situations changed, our motivations have changed. If we notice a pattern in giving up over and over and over again, then we need to maybe look at that as a separate issue. But I don't see a problem with reassessing the level you've needed for that particular time in your life. And I think that that's something that maybe we all struggle with. I mean, myself sometimes as well, when I study a language and I wish I could study more, or I realize a language has gone rusty, I have that niggling feeling myself sometimes too. But then I just have to think, okay, let's be logical about this. Realistically, I studied Georgian for a semester at university in Sweden. Do I need to retain my Georgian? There are no Georgians where I live. There are no Georgian speakers whatsoever. I did it because I was interested in the alphabet and to get to know about the language a little bit. I did that, so I achieved the initial goals. I don't realistically need to be able to hold great conversations in the Georgian language for my day-to-day. I'm highly unlikely to come across any Georgians even within the year. I've never actually been to the country, and I'd love to go. If I went there again, or if I got the chance to sort of go to another university course when I say I went there again, or if I get to go to the country for a first time, yes, I would love to go back to the Georgian and at least revisit the basics to be able to, sort of familiarize myself again with the language. I'd certainly like to do that. But until that time comes, I'm happy to park it or keep it on ice, or however we want to view it. And I certainly don't want to sort of blame myself for having left the language. I think that it's a legitimate reason to leave it, and I don't need to feel that I have to always be on top of every single thing. Just because I started something doesn't mean I can't put it on ice. And I think that's something that people don't often say enough of publicly. And I think that it is a good thing to show that this isn't an issue, and this is something we all do. So it's good that you said it, and it's good that I think that other people say it too. That's fine.
Yeah, I think in terms of like being pragmatic or practical, like the only reason why I started with Hungarian or Polish or Czech was because I was planning a trip to that region, and people told me, yeah, they all speak English. And I knew from experience that no, there are certain regions of the world where people don't speak English well enough where you can get by. So yeah, I gave myself 6 months to just get ready for those languages. And then as soon as I finished my trip, even though it was like for 2 weeks, as soon as I finished the trip, I really didn't keep up on the Hungarian or Polish Czech. I don't really have any kind of regrets of that. I mean, there may be opportunities that come up later on where I might pick up a few words, but I don't exactly want to consider languages as like a razor blade that's disposable, and it's just only for that experience. But I think I agree. If you don't have necessarily connection or people to talk to, there might not be that reason to continue.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it becomes as well a practical issue. After I studied so many, after I'd studied a certain number of languages, particularly, there's only so many languages I can use in a day or in a week. So I made a very conscious decision that there would be language projects that I would do in the summer. And if I got to speak them through the year, great. If I didn't, I wouldn't make a huge active effort to keep those languages up. What I do is during the summer months, maybe revisit them again. So, I've done this with a number of languages like Icelandic. I've done it with Polish. Last year I did it with Latvian and Brazilian Portuguese. And and Norwegian, and this year I'm going to Finland, so I'll be doing it with Finnish. And yeah, the idea is that we'll do a course and hopefully continue for a few years with Finnish to get it to an okay level. But I'm not rushing myself. I'm not putting any pressure on myself. It's just a bit of fun that I do. I don't particularly need to speak Finnish usually, but putting myself in the country will make the need, if you know what I mean. So that sort of gives me the motivation. I have some friends that are Finnish, and they spur me on as well, and I know that I'll be able to at least use it while I'm there. So it's putting that need there, and that's not always possible, but you know, the summer months is the kind of my chance to do that, and so yeah, I mean, I certainly won't blame myself during the year if my Finnish gets rusty again before next summer. But you know, I noticed actually in the gathering in Berlin, my Latvian, I spoke Latvian the very first day when I met some Latvians, and it was very shaky. And then in the end, I was having more conversations, and my Latvian was, I felt it just coming back. As soon as I sort of fluffed the first conversation, I kept feeling this flood of Latvian words and expressions and grammar coming back into my head. And the next time I met up with the same Latvians, it was a lot more there, and we actually could hold a conversation, which was really nice, because it felt, okay, this is working for me. this model isn't just wishful thinking. It is actually there, and it is coming back. So yeah.
Can you walk me through a little bit on how you're going to go with Finnish? Like, if you had like I don't know, if you set yourself like 90-day challenges, things like that, or how would you go about the process of, okay, hacking Finnish for 3 months? What would be your, like, in terms of speaking, reading, writing, listening, how would you go about prioritizing and interacting with people? What would be your first kind of milestones in that process?
Okay, so the first thing I do is get the very basics, like for when I'm going for a summer, this one for Finland now, go for the summer, and I'll do courses at the university in Helsinki. So my plan is I never like to go to a country and know nothing. I think that you can always learn the basics from anywhere in the world that you are. You don't need to learn the basics in the country. It's kind of a big time suck, an energy suck to do that in the country, and you're more likely to fall into the let's just speak English with everyone trap. I found a course book in Finland, and this is the first book that I have that I'll be doing on the course, and I will also do the other subsequent 2 books that follow this. There's 1, 2, and 3. This is called Suomen Mestari, and then I work through the books at the moment. I'm on chapter 4 of this, and I just work through it in order. So there's no real hack. I've got to be honest. It's I work through the book. I look at the grammar. I look at the verbs. I look at how it works. I try and learn the vocabulary, learn it in context. I go through the things that the book really prescribes, and then I learn as much as I can. And then once I've done that, I will do this on this book till chapter 7. I'll do chapter 7 actually, and so I'll reach chapter 8, but I won't start chapter 8 probably before the summer, because my course starts at the start of July. And I'll make sure I've gone through and learned as much of the content, because the basis for level 1. And so my goal is to skip level 1, just do levels 2 and 3 in Finland. That's not as much as it sounds. So level 1 would not even be the full A1 level. It would be the first half of the level A1 in Finnish. But still, there's quite a lot of vocabulary to get through. There's quite a lot of grammar to get through in that time. Finnish is quite a different language. It's not Indo-European. There's a lot of very strange, weird, and wonderful vocabulary for me to learn. And the other thing I'll say is that I'm not doing any speaking in it. So I'm doing it with the audio, listening to the audio, speaking it to myself. The reason I'm not doing it is because the written Finnish that you have in this book and the spoken Finnish in Finland are almost like 2 separate languages. So I'm conscious of that already. all I need to be able to show for the level 2 is that I know this theory and I know this vocabulary. So as long as I can reproduce this, it doesn't have to be perfect, but when I get to Finland, I can reproduce what I've learned and show and demonstrate that I've got the level to be able to start level 2. That's all I need to do. When I arrive in Finland, I can start looking at how people speak and listening for the differences in the speech patterns and how they chop the words up and what they leave out, what they put in, how they simplify the language, because it's a lot more simple in terms of learning the language or speaking the language than what you see in the written form, as far as I understand. And so I'll just try and bridge that gap then when I get there. I should have it about a week before I start the course to start listening to that out for those things and to practice some of what I've done. So hopefully I will be able to go to the course on the first day, do the assessment to make sure that I'm at the right level, and continue with my Finnish. And that's kind of really what I do.
Mm-hmm. So you prefer with the methodology of a book, the structure.
Yeah.
How are your feelings about the kind of speak from day one approach?
It works.
Do you find that effective?
It can be, depending on the language and depending on what you already know. So for Finnish, of course, you can say speak from day one. Speaking from day one would be me saying very, very little, because I can't really guess Finnish very easily, and I can't understand it just random Finnish. It would not be easy to do that, to make that leap. Certainly helps to practice as much as you can. There's simply a lot of new stuff in a language like this that you just need. There's kind of a critical mass that you need to accumulate. You can practice and practice and practice, of course, and it helps to practice. But you need that critical mass to start talking. And there's no way around that. You're not just going to guess of this language. Certainly, if I had Finnish people around me that I could just practice with now and annoy with my awful Finnish, then I would. And I'd certainly do that for other languages, sure. But other languages where, for example, I had this with Norwegian last year, where I could already understand Norwegian fairly well because I spoke Swedish. I was really practicing from day one with very little awareness and de-Swedifying my Norwegian. But for that, I just took the Teach Yourself Norwegian course and went through the whole thing in a month. Because it was almost like reading what the differences are between Swedish and Norwegian for me. It was a lot simpler in terms of a process, and I would practice the dialogues with my italki partner for Norwegian, and it worked out really well. I mean, I have YouTube videos showing how I was at the beginning and how I was at the end of my Norwegian challenge, and I think it worked well.
Do you ever use resources in this case, like for Swedish Norwegian? Would you take a bilingual text that was either published in Sweden to learn Norwegian or published in Norway to learn Swedish? Would you use one of those kind of textbooks or audios to distinguish between one language or the other? Or do you primarily take something that's written in English to learn another foreign language?
Okay, so if I've got nothing available, I will tend to start with a Teach Yourself, colloquial, asimial type book. I would go through that as it's prescribed. So I've got millions of them on the shelf. So let's just take this one, the first one that I can grab. This is from years ago from Bulgarian. And I would typically just go through it, the whole thing, finish that, and then see, or maybe I may even get to chapter 5 or 6 when I feel comfortable if it's a language that I already am familiar with other related languages. And then I normally move to these kinds of books that I'm using for Finnish, which are produced for people who move to Finland, live in Finland, and are trying to assimilate into the society. So I'm doing this with Finnish from the very beginning. In fact, I'm looking at just the course book for the university course. I did it with Latvian. I have this book as well, and these are just in. So this is just in Finnish. This book is just in Latvian that I went through, and I went through the whole course. I went through this whole course for Latvian, and the only language used is Latvian.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is, you get the basics from a teacher self-guide, and then as soon as you can, move into a monolingual environment?
This is from the very beginning of Latvian. This isn't for intermediate students. This is for the very beginning. So you start with this, and so is the Finnish book. They're they start from the very, very basics. But if you're not used to using a book that is only in the target language, it can seem a little bit daunting, because you're like, oh, what is this? Because there's no translation into English at all. You just need to know, you need to go through it and work through it, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes you may need a teacher to help you explain what these things are. Sometimes you may get a book that's got explanations in English of the grammar, so that you can make sense of it a little bit more. I've done this so many times now that I find that I can just make sense of a lot of this anyway. So when I see this, and I see constructions, like I'm seeing this in Finnish. In Finnish, it says here, "Minulla on." It means, so I know, because this is similar to other languages I've met, that to me there is. So I have, and this is how you say I have in Finnish. So I have,
like a Russian or something.
I have a dog, exactly. So, but if you're not used to this kind of construction in a language, you'll look at this and say, what's going on with this language? Why have they added this weird thing to the end of a word, and what does it mean, and what's it for? So it needs some extra explanation. But I find these courses the best for me, because they're tried, they're tested in the country with students at universities over and over again, and they're republished with new additions and changes, and this is why I like them. I love sort of in-country authentic materials that they use for people moving to the country. So yeah, that's what I tend to.
Yeah, I think I also find that, like, at a university level course, you get into some like grammatical details that you might not get in a beginner's guide that might be for a wider general population, I think.
Yeah, I mean, not to poo-poo the other courses, because I mean, I've used colloquial assimil and teach yourself effectively, and done well with them for a few languages, and just all the way through, just using those to get to a basic, intermediate level, and then obviously with those courses you need to supplement your vocabulary. You need to look deeper into the grammar, because in a book this thick, you're not going to be able to tackle everything in all of the grammar and all of the exceptions and all of the vocabulary that you'd need to be at a solid, say, B2 level, or even maybe B1 level. You may need to add extra things in. What's good about these kinds of courses is that they tend to cover the vocabulary that you're likely to need at the stage when you're in the country, because they focus on really the things that you're the most relevant to you.
And going about the language learning process, is it for you, is it the language itself, or is it also the mental exercise of figuring things out, making pieces, putting them together, and getting the bigger picture of this language? Or is where do you see your like, what keeps you kind of motivated with the process, the language learning process?
So for me, the thing is that feeling of when you're like putting a jigsaw puzzle together, and you feel the pieces are just starting to click into place, and it's starting to make sense, and you start seeing the bigger picture of how people use this language, and how it's used to express thoughts in a coherent and sensible way, and how how it all works really, and sort of the nuances between words and things like that. These are all phases and steps in the language learning process that sort of release a kind of endorphin, I suppose. You feel this sort of excitement about it, and you're really happy, and that you're doing this, and you're discovering this language. And that's kind of, for me, the yeah, the thing that I get most out of it, I'd say. And that really isn't so important which language it is. It happens in all of the languages at different stages, and there's always, it's kind of like an onion, there's always a new layer to always finding sort of it's like a never-ending onion, I suppose. And then with the languages, how they interconnect as well, and how they react to each other, and how meaning can alter and change, and grammatical structures can be different but the same from language to language, how they can sort of be nuanced. And it's really quite interesting, I think, when you start getting into language families and neighboring languages. I love getting into that kind of thing.
So do you have, would you say, more of an expertise in the kind of Indo-European families? Have you also experimented a lot with Asian languages as well? Or where do you feel like you are heading towards next?
So I don't feel I'm heading towards anywhere in particular. I like to keep developing my understanding of language families. So, and particularly because of where I live, living in Balkans, the interactions between the languages in this region is particularly interesting to me. So deepening my knowledge of the languages spoken around me is for me something that I would definitely like to continue in the future. At the moment with Greek, it's really interesting because I'd not really focused that much on Greek, apart from to be able to go there and to interact with people for my tourist needs. But the more I get into Greek, the more I see just how deeply rooted, the words and things that we use in many Indo-European languages relate back to it, and how it's influenced a lot of our languages. So that's I'm finding particularly exciting, and I'm very interested in Turkish and how Turkish has influenced, particularly my home language, Macedonian. It's really had an influence on that, and also on other languages spoken like Albanian, and I like finding out more about that, and not just the words, but the turns of phrase and expressions and things that shared, sort of history, linguistic history. Yeah, I mean, it's never ending. It's just it's actually incredible to see how all of this sort of fits together, and you sort of you make links that even native speakers don't necessarily, they're not aware of or conscious of when they use the language. And when you point it out to them in conversations and you talk about it and they analyze it with you, you make discoveries together sometimes that are really nice. And it's nice because it's a conversation and you're discovering it together, and you sort of, they appreciate that insight and you appreciate their insight on how they're using it. And also for many of these things, there isn't the research always done on how this works. So you're sometimes finding things out that people, you haven't got a one-stop shop where you can go and find this out. You know what I mean? So it's kind of something that you just discover.
And with your perspective of like learning many languages together, do you feel like a large amount of like a baggage, grammatical baggage, vocabulary baggage, that you could target another Indo-European language and the process would be getting faster each time?
So any language, I think, that you learn in the family, you're gonna have a huge help learning the next one in the group. That's for sure. There's no doubt about it. The question is then how you feel about doing that. So the question becomes not, could I learn this more easily, more quickly than before without this knowledge? Because that's, I think, just evident that you can. But the issue is, do I need to do this? What are the benefits? What are long-term benefits? What are the dangers of doing it? Could it affect or color my ability to use other languages in the group? as separate entities, or will it mix too much and merge too much? And that's a very separate topic that I think each individual needs to consider and tackle. It certainly isn't easy to speak well a number of languages from the same group. It's just like I've always said to myself that I will never tackle Slovak because I find it too similar to Czech and Polish, and I think that my brain would potentially fry if I did it. I may revisit that. I said I would never learn Bulgarian because it was too similar to Macedonian, but in the end I did, and I can actually separate the two fairly well. My Bulgarian will be Macedonian influence, but it still is a separate language in my head. It doesn't feel so merged as I feared it would be, and I think that's probably because Macedonian is so strong in my head that I can, and I speak the standard form, not a dialect closer to Bulgarian. I think that would have been more of an issue, but I've certainly felt like with some language groups that there are languages that I just won't touch. Ukrainian's another one that I feel that at the moment it's probably not one that I need to go too far into because it would influence my Russian too much, or vice versa, and I would end up speaking some mishmash of the two.
Okay. Yeah, I have a hard time like jumping into Portuguese or Italian. I feel that with my Spanish and French, like I suppose if I really immerse myself in Italian or really immerse myself in Portuguese, I may develop some strategies to kind of keep them separated. But for the time being, I just kind of step back. Do you make conscious efforts to kind of, like, if you have that hesitation, like jump in and work on that, or do you kind of stay on the peripheral of? Do you have strategies now for, especially with language families, like what you said, Polish and Czech and Slovak? You don't want to go into Slovak, but what about keeping Polish and Czech separate, and Polish and Czech?
Yeah, it's hard. It was hard. So when I went into Polish from Czech, it was something that I did very consciously, and I was aware that my Czech would suffer, and it did. Now, I mean, I've had more practice of swapping between Czech and Polish, and it's better than it was, but it would just require constant practice to keep the two languages separate. But I can do it. I can speak Czech and I can speak Polish, but keeping them separate and speaking them back to back is still a struggle. I still find it quite difficult to go, like, for example, if I had two people in the room, one was a Czech speaker, one was a Polish speaker, and I had to go between the two, that would be quite chaotic for me. There are other languages where I don't have that problem so much. So I do speak, say, Italian and Spanish side by side quite happily. And Portuguese, I've not had to do so much, but I do speak Portuguese. I have said that I would not learn Galician. I think that would be probably a killer for me.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. So, and like as a follow-up with that, would you find if somebody said they were going to learn, let's say, French and Russian at the same time or something, that were like completely separate families, do you think that would be like potentially problematic? I mean, more than just studying two languages from the same family at the same time, or would you recommend getting one at a higher level and then starting one at a lower level so that they don't mix and match?
Yeah, I think starting one language first is good. If it's the same group, I'd say get that strong first before you start the next one, because it can be confusing. But each person is different, and you can try and see. There's no shame in saying, okay, this is confusing, and then just going to leave one for a little bit and concentrate on the other one and get that strong. When I find that when languages are not related, I find it easier to keep them apart. And I think that tends to be the experience I've seen from other people as well. So You know, if you're learning, let's say Finnish now, I'm studying, and also Greek, they're very different languages, and so it would be quite difficult for me to just randomly put Greek words in a Finnish sentence, or vice versa, because the sounds are very different. The words just don't look anything like each other. Some people find that even it can be complicated to do, and that they feel they have a foreign language part of their brain, and it's different. So I'd say try and see how you get on. If you need to just do one at a time, do one at a time. There's no shame in that at all. There are many people who have learned many languages and do that. In fact, if you learn more than one language at a time, you are in essence dividing your time, because you can't concentrate on just one. So obviously, you will go at a slower pace, because you're not just focusing on one thing. Like anything in life, if you're focusing on more than one thing, then it's gonna affect how quickly you can get through, other things.
So you would, I mean, personally for yourself, you would recommend one language at a time. And for your review process, how, because you say you speak multiple languages throughout the day, I imagine that could be an actual live conversation, maybe a tweet, maybe a message on Facebook, an email. I suppose, do those count as your interactions with those languages, or what do you feel is helping you maintain languages on a daily basis?
Okay, so for me, so I speak 5 languages at home, and then I speak a number of other languages outside of the house, on the street or with friends from different countries. So probably in a typical week, I may use around 15 or so languages, maybe. That's a rough guess. But that would be a typical kind of week for me. And then outside of that, I would see things online or TV or film or songs or some interaction online with somebody, maybe in some additional languages, maybe either through the week or through the month, or through the year, depending. And then the odd trip might expose me to another language. So for example, Latvian, I'm not normally exposed to, but being in Berlin, I met 3 Latvian speakers and we spoke in Latvian. So certainly there will be differences through the year, but that would be my normal day to day.
I don't know if you have these experiences with your interviews with your daughter, but yes, just one second. Okay, so we have a third guest on the
I do indeed.
My trilingual son, who speaks to me in Spanish and French with his mother, and I speak to him in English. So he's a brief making a brief appearance in the show today. But sorry for the interruption. But yeah, so you speak 5 languages at home. Which 5 are those?
So I speak Macedonian, English, French, German, and Spanish.
Mm-hmm. And when we last spoke in the Add 12 finale with the Add 1 challenge, I was asking you a little bit about how you are with you were telling me that you speak to her in French and German and English, but now mostly French.
Okay, so my daughter and I speak French normally. That's our normal language, and then we do homework and things in English, because she studies in English mainly. So most of her subjects are in English. She speaks Macedonian with her mum, and I speak Macedonian only to my wife. Then I speak to her for about half an hour to an hour a day in Spanish and German. What I do is I don't want to put pressure on this, so it's not something I demand she speak or do anything particular. It's just normal everyday stuff. I try and make it varied so that we get to use different vocabulary. So I'll do it in different contexts. It may be in the kitchen one day, it may be bedtime routine another day, it may be a day out at the zoo another day, maybe at the cinema, maybe at the shops. So we're using different vocabulary and different types of language in different places. So I try not to be too sort of regimental about it. Now she's older, so she's almost 9. But when she was younger, it used to be more of a routine, so that she identified the language of the place and particular activities, so that she would be introduced to it. But now she's older, she has other things to do, and of course she has other subjects. I mean, languages are cool, and we love languages, right? But she has to learn maths, she has to learn science, and there are lots of other very important subjects that she needs to concentrate on. So what I don't want to do is make her do the same thing over and over again in lots and lots of languages, because that makes no sense. I mean, I function perfectly well in the languages I have. You know, languages like German or even Macedonian learned after university. I work perfectly fine in those languages, and I didn't need to do all of them as a child. So yeah, I don't feel like I can make her do that when I didn't do it.
And do you notice with, I don't know, her language acquisition process, are there things that you reflect on of like, oh, okay, maybe this is a different approach, or observing how children learn a language, does this influence you at all?
Her approach and her way of doing it, not really. No, I don't. She's learning in a very different way, because she's been brought up with 5 languages, and she's never known any different. She's had 3 languages from birth, and German and Spanish she's had from 16 months old. So she's never known a time in her life, she can't remember when she's not understood Spanish and German. They've always been there. She has dabbled in other languages, so she's dabbled in Chinese and Japanese and Hebrew and Latin and Italian and Arabic. She likes Arabic at the moment. She keeps saying she wants to learn Arabic properly. The thing is that, as I say, you know, she's got other subjects she needs to do, and I'm very conscious that I don't want to overload her. She's not me, and I'm not trying to make a mini me. I'm just giving her what I can give her for free, which I think are useful languages for her future. Understanding Spanish and German in Europe and in the US and in the rest of the world are useful languages. French and English really complement each other, because after all, English has borrowed heavily from French. So much of our vocabulary is from French, and much of our literature, when she does English literature, has a lot of French vocabulary and expression. So I think it's important for her to really help her with her English. So there are many, many reasons why I've chosen those languages. And I think that she has time to learn others as well. So I will let her do that in her time, and I'll support her for sure if she wants to, but I want to make sure that her other subjects are solid too. You know, after all, I'm not, you know, we have to be realistic as to what children need to do and what they want to do, and try and get a sort of a nice balance between all of that.
Yeah, I definitely agree on like the not wanting to kind of, I mean, being proud to see, okay, the children learning and progressing, but at the same time kind of letting them discover their own interest and what their learning style is or things like that. I see this with my kids. I see that also with their like musical, like they like to sing. I play several instruments, but I also want to just let them discover it on their own. I don't want to say like, okay, I'm going to transmit my 20 years of musical experience on them instantly, but
yeah,
let them kind of find it as something pleasurable. Or so.
For sure. And I think, you know, this is all we can do as parents is give what we can give in terms of our knowledge and our experience. So this is why I give the languages that I can give. And, you know, they're free, they're easy. It's no real maintenance. It's just speaking, my normal day-to-day. So it's not a huge investment in terms of, what she needs to do extra. There's nothing really extra she needs to do, just listen. And like you say, I mean, my daughter does instruments. She plays the piano. She also practices sports. And I want her to do other things that other children do as well, and so that she's a well-rounded individual. And that's what I'd like to send her out into the world to do, to be a strong, confident, well-rounded individual. To make her to go where she's interested in, and to study what she enjoys, whether that's languages or something else.
And what you just said about like speaking confidently, I'm in the process of developing like a new online course, and one of the things I've been thinking about is like, what would you say are some of the big differences between building confidence and how that influences speaking fluently? Since I think, I mean, your website, speaking fluently, it's definitely the fluency route. How does confidence fit into that?
That's a very big question. See, we talk about fluency and speaking fluently in language terms as a second language, but of course there are native speakers, monolingual, who talk about speaking fluently, and what they mean is not stammering or feeling confident to speak in front of a crowd. And so the interpretation of that is quite different. Sometimes it can be a confidence thing has a sort of an issue that's behind it. Maybe it's a stammer, or maybe it's a vocalizing emotions or thoughts in a constant free-flowing sort of stream of words and grammar, to sort of really highlight what we're thinking and saying, what we want to do. And to do that I think there are some similarities to be drawn. Certainly it's building that confidence of using patterns, and certainly, I mean, I'm aware that when people do training on these kinds of fluency of speaking fluently workshops, they do talk about these sort of getting into these patterns and rhythms of language. And I'd say that really that is the thing, isn't it? It's easy to walk a well-trodden path, and it's harder to go through that path with a machete, cutting down all the weeds and vines that are growing in front of it for the first time. So certainly easier the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, nth time that you utter a sentence or an idea in a language and use these patterns that you do. And this is why these sentence methods that you see around and things like that, people like them, because you can imagine yourself using that sentence and then substituting words out. And of course that's how we learn our languages. We just hear an utterance, and we know that it expresses this need or this thing or this thought, and that's how we sort of start talking. I mean, when I think of my daughter, when she heard your arm, we know it's your arm, but her interpretation of it was one word, your arm. And so when she started saying my arm, she'd say my ram, because she wasn't distinguishing your arm. She was saying your ram. Ram was arm. So she's saying my ram, which was funny, because we know why, because we analyze the language later when we learn how to read and write and all of these other things. But it's the patterns in the language that make you sound like a native speaker, that make you feel more confident. That, of course, you're not going to say your arm, you're always going to say your arm. And it's always going to sound like your ram, your ram, a ram instead of an arm. But as a native speaker, it sounds right. As a non-native speaker, it's going to be those kinds of little things, are things that you need to train to make yourself sound more fluent and more like the people that have it as a native language. But that just takes time, and going down those well-trodden paths and making them well-trodden so that you feel confident and you're able to express yourself in a more fluent manner. And of course, fluency is also relative, depending on the subject matter, which paths you tread. If you don't tread the paths of political rhetoric and speech, then of course it's going to be much more difficult to sound fluent or to be fluent on those topics than it is, say, on introducing yourself, which is something you would do on more or less a daily basis, especially if you're meeting new people constantly. If you work in an information center or something like that, there are certain types of vocabulary that you'd use more often than others.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent explanation, and your insights. And I really like what you said here about kind of going down a familiar path, or starting this from scratch and really having to break ground. It is perhaps going to take more energy than if you are using some proven techniques, or in the case of what we've spoken so far about language families, if you can build on, maybe that can help as well. Definitely, I see with some of the language classes that I have to teach with certain people where there might be some emotional issues, there might be maybe some embarrassing memories where, like in a classroom setting, they have to kind of overcome those situations to start speaking the language. So some students have said, okay, you're more of a psychologist, a therapist, than an actual language teacher. And I've seen like maybe some sessions where you have to tackle some of these issues to just give people the impression that they're speaking in a very comfortable, non-risk environment, and that at that point, then they can just start kind of letting go and speaking the language.
There's a heck of a lot of psychological baggage that goes with speaking generally. Confidence is a huge thing. If you get it in your mother tongue, if people don't feel confident on a subject, and they don't know, or they don't feel confident on how much they think they should know more, or they think the other person should think they know more, it gets really convoluted. And these sort of thoughts on what should I know? Am I showing myself as being really ignorant, or have I not paid enough attention? And will that person perceive me as this person? And that, we have a lot of this guesswork and second guesswork going on. And I don't think that's limited to any really of these fields. I think that, and foreign languages would certainly be that as well. So, what people would expect me, do I have to second guess what people will expect me to know after doing 7 chapters of this book? What do they really expect me to know, and what will I ultimately be able to do? I've been through this myself, and I've done elements of a course before I start another course, and I think that I don't know very much, but actually when I turn up, it's beyond what they'd expected, or it might even fall short of what they expected. You second guess, and there are always so many perceptions. And yeah, you're exactly right. It's kind of, you feel like you're almost sort of a lay psychologist trying to fumble your way around in the dark, looking for that light switch to actually enlighten the person, to give them that confidence to see what's actually in the room, and to see what the reality actually is. And it's not always simple, but it's a necessary thing to do.
And with your languages and with your opportunities to speak with people in front of public audiences, do you feel that people put you sometimes on a pedestal and think that you have all these language learning answers? Do you feel that pressure sometimes in those opportunities?
No. I don't feel any pressure. I don't think that I can only tell people what I know, and I think it comes from understanding where my boundaries are and knowing what I know and knowing what I don't know. And I feel comfortable in my own skin, saying and admitting what I know and don't know, and referring to other people. You don't win any particular awards for studying these languages. I'm happy to share the knowledge that I have with whoever wants to know it, and I'm always happy to talk and but I also like to learn from other people too, and so there's no pride for me in thinking that I need to feel I need to know everything or even close to everything. So I'm quite happy to refer and to listen. In fact, I actually prefer to hear about things I don't know. Personally, I like to learn new things because there's a wealth of things I don't know, and I would say that sometimes people, I think in the community, yeah, they would maybe look at me as maybe somebody that they, that's been through the process many times, and therefore maybe as an example. Whether that's a pedestal or not, I don't know if that would be the term that I would use. When I go to events like the Gathering, like I just come back from, or when I go to my own Polyglot conference events, I get people come up to me and they say that they saw my video and this happened in New York. They say they went to university and studied languages or linguistics, after they'd seen and felt inspired by something that I put online, and I found that very humbling. And I was really grateful for those comments of people taking the time to say that to me, because you're not paid for. I'm not paid for anything that I do in this way, and so that for me is kind of like a payment. It's really nice to hear that somebody feels that you've made a difference and that you've done something that's helped them. So I really, really appreciate that. And so kind of, yeah, if someone's looked up to me for that kind of inspiration, then I'm really grateful. But I don't feel pressured or in any way by that. I just feel grateful for that acknowledgement.
Yeah, I think that's a really good approach, and I really appreciate from what I've seen with the different where I see you online. I think you have a big presence, but what I've generally seen is a very approachable, humble acknowledgement of what you said of you know what you know, and recognize the limits and the struggles in the learning process, and I find that very refreshing to see that in that process, to know that, okay, if I struggle with a language, I know, okay, well, Richard also struggles with these languages, but it's still the process, and I find that a very good as a role model. I think a lot of people connect with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just to wrap up, then, where would be the best ways people should get in contact with you? Your website, YouTube, Facebook.
Yeah, sure. So probably the best place is my Facebook page is Speaking Fluently. So it's facebook.com/speaking fluently. I have a blog, speakingfluently.com. And of course, the upcoming Polyglot Conference will take place in Thessaloniki in Greece. And that will be the last week of October, the 29th and the 30th of October. And more information about that will be at polyglotconference.com. And there's also a Facebook page and a Facebook group for Thessaloniki that you can find. So facebook.com/Polyglot Conference. And then the group you should be able to find as well if you do a search for Polyglot Conference Thessaloniki 2016. And they're probably the best places. We also do polyglot workshops as well, and do those around the world. So again, to talk about experience and to give people tips, tricks, and techniques for how to be effective in your language learning and to work through individual challenges with language learning and to answer questions in a day workshop, which we've put on a number of times. And I do that with other people. Alex Rawlings and I do those. We've partnered with Ollie Richards in London and many other people besides in other countries.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking languages with you and hearing about your learning process and the projects that you work on and the the conference and your experience at the gathering. So I really enjoyed this opportunity to talk with you. So thank you very much. And I guess, I mean, I didn't really want to jump into other languages, but I guess I'll just end saying merci, gracias, danke, karsanam, teşekkürler, dziękuję, spasiba, and I know you could probably add another 20, 30 to the list. Thank you very much.
Very welcome. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.